This is what Frank Luntz said. Frank Luntz, popular pollster. He is a guy who has been doing this for his entire adult life. He's not right-leaning. He's not left-leaning. He's pretty down the middle. He's bothered a lot of Trump people over the years. I used to be more of a Republican pollster, but he's now on CNN all the time. Frank Luntz wrote very early this morning at about 2 a.m. on X, "It's words like this from J.D. Vance that have made quite a few undecided voters in my focus group say, quote, I don't like Trump at all, but I will cast my vote for J.D. Vance." What clip is he talking about? He's talking about this clip from last night in a News Nation town hall that J.D. Vance did with Chris Cuomo. And this feels like the perfect Friday conversation to have with you. No matter what happens in 11 days, no matter who ends up winning, we can't put ourselves in positions as Americans where we discard lifelong friendships because somebody votes for the other team. As J.D. Vance said last night, if you do that, you have made a terrible mistake. Let's play this clip from J.D. Vance because everyone thinks J.D. Vance is this like weird guy who makes fun of childless cat ladies, and they have totally misrepresented who this guy is. Every time you watch this guy talk, whether it's on the podcast that he's done with Theo Von and some of the others, whether it's a town hall he did last night with Fredo Cuomo, no matter what, you will come away thinking, hey, that guy seems awfully reasonable. And he is by far, between Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance, and Tim Walz. J.D. Vance is the most normal and likable of the four by a mile. Play this clip from last night, News Nation Town Hall.
We've got to be better at communicating and talking to one another. The biggest thing that I worry about, we're talking about threats to democracy. That's a term that you hear a lot. To me, the biggest threat to democracy is the rising tide of censorship. The idea that we should be trying to silence our fellow Americans rather than persuade them and talk to them. That's always going to lead to people being pissed off because they don't like to be told what to think or what to say. They like to talk to one another. And that's one thing that I'll always commit to. As you know, you're vice president for the next 4 years, I'll always try to talk to people. We'll go out there and we'll do events with people who disagree with us. We'll answer questions from people who don't always see eye to eye. But I think if we set the tone at the top, the leadership of this country is all about communicating with one another. I think that's how we start to heal the divide, but we all have a role in it. And one final point I'll say about this, and, you know, don't get too personal all the time, but, you know, one of the things I've seen, especially from, you know, some of my wife's friends and some of my friends, is that they disagree with us on politics sometimes. They'll get very personal about it. And if you're discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, then you've made a terrible, terrible mistake and you should do something different. Like, don't cast aside. Like, most of my family obviously is going to vote for, you know, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and if they're not, actually, I need to talk to them. But I've got friends who like me personally, acquaintances who aren't necessarily going to vote for me. That doesn't make them bad people. And we can't, this is my most important advice, whether you vote for me, whether you vote for Donald Trump, whether you vote for Kamala Harris, don't cast aside family members and lifelong friendships. Politics is not worth it. And I think if we follow that principle, we'll heal the divide in this country.
How about that from J.D. Vance last night, News Nation Town Hall? Now, could all of our leaders do a better job trying to heal that divide? Abso-freaking-lutely. Because I know some of you right now are listening and you're screaming at your radio, you're screaming at your Alexa or your Google Home or your phone if you're streaming us on the KCMO Talk Radio app, and you're screaming and you're hyperventilating and you're going, but Trump, but Trump, but Trump, but Trump. Yes, but Trump. Yes, he could do a better job. Barack Obama could have done a much better job. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they have all failed us at different levels on the inability to heal the divide. But as Americans, we can ignore their BS. As citizens, we can ignore the hyperbolic vitriol. And J.D. Vance is absolutely spot on. That sometimes people get way too personal about it. And it does seem like it's more one way over the other, but I'll leave that opinion on the side for now. If you are discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, you have made a terrible mistake. Now, if it's because they treated you like garbage, that's different. But if you're the one facilitating that, don't do it. You're making a major error. I've got some guys that I grew up with who I know are not going to vote the same way I am. But I'll tell you what, when we get together, it doesn't come up. When we're talking about old stories from high school and middle school and college and whatever, it doesn't come up. None of us want it to. We're not going to convince each other one way or the other. So what's the point? And if you can't have those relationships, or if you're casting aside lifelong friendships over this, it's not worth it. And J.D. Vance saying that, and then Frank Luntz pointing out that people actually end up liking J.D. Vance a lot when they hear him talk. This is something that can go a long way for not just Donald Trump if he ends up winning, but for America as a whole, because it's a message that our leaders desperately need to be saying right now. And compare what J.D. Vance said last night to what Barack Obama was saying last night, screaming in Georgia about how Trump's a wannabe dictator and putting on his fake phony accent that he likes to use when he's in front of certain crowds. You tell me who's right now joyful down the home stretch of this election cycle. You tell me who's doing it with a smile on their face. I saw Trump last night dancing to YMCA again on stage, and he was doing the Trump dance, but if you didn't see it, it's hysterical. I'll share it on X at Pete Mundo. At the end of him doing the dance, did you see this, Mark, by the way? At the end of him doing the dance, what does he do? He does a fake golf swing on stage. It was hysterical. So I'm thinking to myself, man, I know there's one side who's been like, we're the joyful ones here. There was not a lot of joy last night in Georgia as they talked about Trump basically being a Nazi and being someone who's going to be a dictator. And then I see Trump doing his golf swing on stage, doing his goofy dance to the YMCA. And J.D. Vance is like, do not throw away friendships. Do not throw away family or cast aside family because they don't vote the way you vote. Don't. It's not worth it. Don't do it. And on a Friday, I want to hear from you at 913-408-7957. That's how we do it on KCMO. Let's start off with Jeremiah in Leavenworth. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Hey, brother, great topic here. J.D. Vance came across to me as the most presidential person out of all four of them as well with the debate. And I'm hoping that eventually he runs. I think he and Tulsi Gabbard together would make an awesome ticket. The question I have, let's play out something for a second, because I don't know statistically if this has ever happened. Has a vice presidential candidate on a losing ticket ever gone on to win a presidential election? I don't know if that's ever happened, in case Trump loses. But either way, I think J.D. Vance is definitely one for the nation, and I feel like we're going to need to have a good unifier in 2028. I think he might be the guy to help out the country on the whole. So that's all I had.
Here's what I would say, Jeremiah. I am not a presidential historian. I'd have to where's Bill O'Reilly? Someone get a copy of Confronting the Presidents out for me, please. I'm going to get one of my producers to run down the hall. I got a copy in my office. Just don't grab the signed copy. Thank you, Mark. The only thing I don't think anyone's ever become president after a failed VP nomination. Now, Bob Dole was the VP nominee for Ford. He obviously became the nominee. He didn't win. So that's the only thing that comes to mind in recent American history. But I can't think of a VP nominee who lost and then ended up becoming president at some point. But here's the thing. No matter what happens, J.D. Vance's future is very bright. That is very clear. Win or lose, he will be the front runner for the GOP in 2028. There's no doubt in my mind about that. 913-408-7957 as we roll through the morning on KCMO. I want to get to your calls here on what J.D. Vance just said, though. Maybe you've got a personal story, an anecdote on a friendship or a relationship or a family member that totally went off the reservation after what happened in the political world. And it really doesn't need to be that way. All right, just real quick, we're going to reset the conversation with you, but caller just before the break asked if somebody had ever been a VP nominee and lost and then became the president.
Yeah, you may have seen me. I turned on my mic to say a name.
Yes.
And then I thought, no, I better look.
So I thought about Bob Dole, who was Gerald Ford's VP pick in 76, became the nominee in 96, but did not win. And then a lot of you were texting and saying Nixon.
I was thinking, okay, Nixon lost to Kennedy, okay, and then he was president. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, when I looked it up, he was VP for Eisenhower during his 2 terms, so he won.
Yes.
So he wasn't a losing VP.
He wasn't a losing VP.
And then he did lose as a presidential candidate to Kennedy.
And then won. He doesn't qualify under the question that was asked. A VP nominee who lost as VP and then became president. The closest I could think of is Dole. So I don't know. We'll have to get O'Reilly on it here.
I was telling Mark, I don't remember the 1800s. I don't know my Hamiltons for my Burrs and all that. So, and then people wore wigs. They weren't necessarily Dems or Republicans, so it's hard to say.
To the Nixon point, though, J.D. Vance is pretty young to be a VP candidate, so he can bounce back. If it doesn't work out this time, he can bounce back.
He will.
Absolutely.
And no doubt about it. He's got the skill set to do that for sure. So, J.D. Vance, just play the last 30 seconds again, Mark, to hit the reset on this at 8:23 on a Friday, Red Friday morning on KCMO. J.D. Vance, Town Hall, News Nation last night saying, do not throw away your relationships because of politics. Oh, loading. Recalculating. All right, let me know when you're ready there, big fella. Okay, go.
Communicating and talking to one another. The biggest thing that I worry about, we're talking about threats to democracy. That's a term that you hear a lot. To me, the biggest threat to democracy is the rising tide of censorship. The idea that we should be trying to silence our fellow Americans rather than persuade them and talk to them. That's always going to lead to people being pissed off because they don't like to be told what to think or what to say. They like to talk to one another. And that's one thing that I'll always commit to. As you're vice president for the next 4 years, I'll always try to talk to people. We'll go out there and we'll do events with people who disagree with us. We'll answer questions from people who don't always see eye to eye. But I think if we set the tone at the top, the leadership of this country is all about communicating with one another. I think that's how we start to heal the divide, but we all have a role in it. And one final point I'll say about this.
That's good. It goes on, but you get the point from J.D. Vance. And he's absolutely nailed it. Remember, look at his political background. The guy couldn't stand Trump. Now he's his VP pick, right? Like talking through it and reevaluating people based on what they do and being able to talk to somebody and say, well, I disagreed with you. I thought you were this. Now I realize you're that. Regardless of your political feelings, that's a healthy way to look at the world. Jonathan's in Kansas City. He's on KCMO, 913-408-7957. What's up, Jonathan?
This kind of gets into the whole culture of cancellation. And I'll never forget a couple years ago when I used to drive for Uber Lyft, and I was driving somebody, and she asked a simple question, like, what are some things you listen to, right? So not getting too deep in political.
So you told him KCMO. You told him 95.7. That's what you did.
Not exactly. I said, well, I guess technically he's on KCMO. I mentioned Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
And, listen, you could listen to all kinds of people today, all kinds of political people on the left and right. If you're going to listen to someone on the right, Ben Shapiro is more moderate on the right. He's not like someone like Alex Jones.
Correct.
And when I said that, she's like, the huge misogynist and he hates women. And I'm like, excuse me? Well, come to find out, 5 minutes later, I'm at the gas station after I drop her off, filling up and whatever, going in there and getting something. And she reported me for harassment. And she was the one who asked who I listened to. And it's like, I'm sorry, harassment is where I make inappropriate comments about somebody.
Wow.
Not not who I happen to listen to for a podcast. And, it just goes into when they say, well, we need to be able to define hate speech and define harassment and all that, you know what it is? It's anything you don't like. And the fact that we're getting to that point now, we're doing it. I mean, that's why, you can't talk about it in the workplace.
Yeah.
You can't talk about it with friends and family. And,
I will say this much, Jonathan. Thank you. I'm running out of time, and I want to add to what you just said. That's a crazy story. But what I will add is the data shows that while Republicans are called by the media fascists and neo-Nazis and all these crazy things, this is from the Washington Post a couple of years ago. Their study that they did at the Washington Post shows that just over half of Republicans, 53%, said that they have at least some friends who are Democrats. Well, about a third of Democrats, 32%, said they have at least some Republican friends. So it's Republicans, based on the data, who are more likely and more willing, clearly, to have Democratic friends than Democrats are willing to have Republican friends. Because in large part, Republicans are like, man, your ideas stink. I don't want to end up with, this socialistic environment. But Democrats say, you're a bunch of Nazis and, call it Ben Shapiro, misogynist, and all these other things.
Those statistics may suggest Republicans don't have as many friends as they think.
Maybe that's it,
with
too.
The Dems, because that Dem would not, in turn, recognize you as a friend, potentially.
Yeah, that may be it as well. But when I see 53% of Republicans say they have Democratic friends and 32% of Democrats say they have Republican friends, that tells me which side has the more open mind.
Tolerance.
When it comes to exactly. Who's tolerant around here again?